In the last year or so, I've come to learn something about how I'm perceived. I have this reputation of being a very tough interviewer. It's not so much that I'm gruff or I'm mean or a jerk when I'm asking questions. It's just that some interviewees, they find it hard to answer the questions that I'm asking. As I was thinking about it though, I look at myself and I go, I don't understand why it's all that tough. I have this sign, it's in my office. I want to show it to you. It says, I totally agree with myself. So maybe, in fact, it does actually make a lot of sense that I really didn't understand initially why people had that perception. But as I've explored this insight into myself, I've realized that there are a couple of things that I am trying to do. I'm trying to understand what is a person's point of view. I'm trying to uncover what new insights might they bring to the business that will add value immediately. I'm trying to understand, do they have a different point of view or a different perception that makes me question what I already believe? Or maybe something that's just genuinely interesting. But if that's not how you're wired, I can see how this can be a very, very tough thing to do. When you have this underlying belief that what got you here is not going to keep you there, then you start to look around and figure out how can you make yourself, how can you be a lifelong learner? With the fast pace of change in business today, what we have to realize is that I'm finding myself more driven than ever to be on that quest of lifelong learning so that I can answer those tough questions.
Exactly. And welcome to While You're Working Live. We appreciate everybody coming to join us for this really exciting episode. We have such a great topic for everybody out there, especially if you're watching us right now. You should really appreciate this topic. It's all about lifelong learning. Some of you may be sitting out there wondering if your 1993 MBA is even still relevant. It seems like the marketing world today changes at a rapid pace. Like yesterday, what was going on in Facebook algorithm is not going to be the same as it is tomorrow. So how do you keep up with it all? The answer is to be a lifelong learner. And today we have a guest on with us. Well, we have two guests actually, but the first guest is super important, and he is the epitome of role models for being a lifelong learner. Please welcome with me, Douglas Burnett. He is he is host of the Marketing Book podcast, and we are so thrilled to have him on the show with us today. Hey, Douglas.
Hey, good to be here. And Chip, that was so great. You've even got me inspired.
Well, you already know, we were talking before we started. I'm a humongous, huge, really, really, really big fan of yours.
Well, super. You've made my day. Thanks very much. I'll see that. I'm just kidding. No, that's great. It's great to hear. It really makes me happy to know that my podcast is helping people. There's so much to learn and keep up with, and so I read a book every week or more sometimes, just to be able to interview the authors, and even I am trying my best to keep up with what's changing at I think an increasing pace in marketing and in sales as well.
Exactly. I heard an impressive stat that I really wanted everybody to know. I think you're now maybe this week up to 173 books read and interviewed authors. Is that correct?
That's right. Let's see. No, this Friday it's episode 175.
Nice. I wrote this episode or the script a couple weeks ago. So you're already ahead of me. This fast paced, where I can't even keep up with it. 2 weeks is all went by. Yeah. Anyway, I also hear that you're a big Scotch fan. What's your favorite Scotch to drink?
Balvenie, and I haven't been drinking any at all today. So the reason you heard about this is because the only downside of doing this podcast and reading a book each week, which if you're going to start a podcast where you interview the authors, somehow it just wasn't clear to me that I was going to need to read each book. Mm-hmm. It's just one of those things you didn't really think through. I'm sure that's never happened to the two of you, but I just hadn't thought that through. But it's been really good for me. But the only downside is that it's cut way into my Scotch drinking.
It cuts into the Scotch. Well, you know what? I think a nice swirl of some Scotch and reading a book at the same time, they could be done simultaneously, maybe. So
there's a couple of authors suggested that I drink while I read, and it would actually make the reading go faster.
I think it would. Yes. Well, we are super excited to have you on the show, and we have some great talking points that we are going to get into here in just a little bit. And with us as well is Chip Rosales, one of the managing partners here at Rogue. And Chip, you're just absolutely glowing, and that's because you got back from your 20th anniversary celebration. Where did you go?
I did. We went to St. Lucia, 20 years. And
amazing.
It was a great time. Super glad to be back.
That's great.
Congrats.
And you just showed me a picture that you were still reading and being a lifelong learner on the beach. You're just a little bit of an overachiever.
I had to have my proof, but it's one of my very favorite things to do. So yeah, I was on the beach and it just happened to be a casual one, but I was like, Ashley, when I say I was, I really was.
Well, I am thrilled to have you both here. And I think we're going to get into some really great things because if I had to pinpoint 2 role models for being a lifelong learner, it would probably be both of you. I mean, the amount that you read and the suggestions that you both have, both on your podcast and being my boss here at Rogue, they're always great. And I know that I keep up with the paces whenever I continue my lifelong learning. So let's get into our first kind of talking point here. I think it's a really impressive one. I heard it, Douglas, on one of your other shows, I think that you did. You said that the average American spends 680 hours on social media per year. I'm wondering if this probably excludes teenagers, but that is a lot of hours to be spent on a social media platform. Oh, and I think we lost Douglas on his volume. He's going to pop back in for us. But so I want to get into this because I think it's important because reading books and keeping up with those paces on the learning is hard to do, and it's hard to prioritize that time. So what are your tips and tricks for making that happen, Chip?
I think a realization that being a lifelong learner and putting the time in to understand all of this, I think that is the differentiator. I think that is the catalyst that gives you new opportunities. And so, while we've got Douglas, I'm sure he's got a whole bunch of other really good ideas, but I do think that this is the catalyst. This is the differentiator for people, especially in our field and in our space. Business leaders right now, this is your differentiator. Being a lifelong learner and being able to understand these things is the differentiator.
Yeah, all the studies will show that big learners are the big earners now. And it's like continuing medical education for a person in that field is for us. We have to keep learning. And I'll tell you what one of my big motivations is. There was a time, because I came from a really big advertising background, and a couple years ago, last 5 or 10 years ago, I was starting to feel like there were dinosaur scales growing on my skin. And there were some certain things I didn't know about and things I needed to learn about. And I was starting to feel like I was losing touch with what was going on. And it really terrified me, probably more than it does for most people. And that's part of the reason I'm so motivated. I never want to be in a situation where I don't have a sense that I kind of know what's going on.
Yeah,
so
I know what you mean. And I think this is the kind of thing that's actually attractive. I think this is the thing that wants people, that people want to be around you. They want to know what your point of view is. That's what gets you noticed. It's how you progress in your career and what you're doing from that perspective. It's what gets you noticed. I think about you've had some of this on your own podcast, Douglas, where we've talked about the robots and they're going to take over and what AI is going to do and all of these kinds of things. But it's very hard to replace people when you take the AI portion in there and yes, automate all the things that are easy to automate and all the things that are routine and all the things that are getting you dinosaur scales. But what about relationship? What about empathy? What about all the things that matter from a humanity perspective? That's what we bring to it. And our point of view allows us to be able to take advantage of those AI initiatives and do something amazing with it. That's not the thing that technology is going to replace.
Yeah, and I think the more you understand about AI, the more you're able to see where our role as the humans kind of fits in, there are certain things that can't be replaced. There are some things that can be replaced by machine learning and AI, but not everything. And there's no need to be fearful of that.
Exactly. I think Chip and I were talking to that point yesterday about this, and we were saying that the more that you learn, it actually gives you, as either the marketer or the business man or woman, the opportunity to make an educated call or an educated decision on something, instead of just having to take a guess. You actually are able to say, confidently, no, AI isn't for us right now, or confidently, AI is for this particular place or piece of our business, but really we're going to section it off from everything else. And so I think that anybody that has the opportunity to continue learning and even honing in on a certain area has a really great future ahead of them. So
this is the antithesis of complacency. It is it gives you stories to tell, it gives you a point of view, gives you the place to start. I mean, we were also talking about this. I've got a 15, almost 16-year-old daughter. We're going to be, going on a vacation this summer. And one of the things we'll start doing is all the college tours and all these things. I gave her a book, Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, because I wanted her to read those first couple chapters as she's trying to think through how is she actually going to, create the best opportunity for herself. And he had some really good ideas in there. So, practicing what you're preaching and actually passing that on. I mean, I'm even doing it to my 16-year-old daughter. I'm sure she's hating that. But at the same point in time, I think it's the opportunity that's going to, that she'll be able to really use and create something out of.
I agree. And I'm sure she's always super enthused to have a book to read. But along those same lines, to both of you, we'll start with Douglas. It's not only about prioritizing that learning in your life, but, taking the time to figure out what kind of books and things to read, I think is something our viewers would be really interested in. Now, I know that the number one thing they can do is listen to the Marketing Book Podcast, especially if they're in the sales and marketing field. However, sometimes that even seems like a daunting task in and of itself. So how do you guys figure out what books you want to read and what is going to be most beneficial for you?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can?
Yes.
Okay.
Woo!
It's on my computer. Well, in terms of how do I'm sorry, the audio keeps jumping around on me. The question is, how do I find the books, or?
Yeah. How do you find the books? Because we're talking about prioritizing lifelong learning. So obviously people are in a time crunch. They're trying to figure out what to read and actually apply that in the most beneficial and efficient way.
Right. So there's a couple things that are going on. One is, if it's a topic that hasn't been covered on the podcast, I do want to cover that. So for instance, Chip mentioned AI. There was a book about artificial intelligence for marketers. Great. There was one book that was exclusively about email marketing. I hadn't had one. So it's sort of, I'm like building out a portfolio, and I'm trying to round out the curriculum for myself and the listener. And then there's some other issues. Like I tend to just have books that are published by major publishers. Mm-hmm. Very few self-published books, and nothing against self-published authors, but the quality of the ones from the publishers are generally much better because there's been a lot more people involved in the editing process. And if I have to read the darn thing, it needs to be well written. And also sometimes. Is it something I want to read? I don't tend to have a whole lot of books about social media on, because it changes quite a bit, but also I feel like I've kind of beaten that one to death. So it has to be of interest to me. And some of my personal things that are of greatest interest to me are the intersection of marketing and sales and marketing alignment. That's very interesting. As you know, I have a lot of books about sales. So that's another issue. It's the Marketing Book Podcast, but the more that marketers understand about sales, the more successful they're going to be. Absolutely. The less that marketers understand about sales, the more likely they're not going to be working in marketing. And that's more so now than it was even 5 years ago. There are a lot of marketers that have never been on a sales call. There are a lot of marketers who've never spoken to a customer.
My gosh. I don't even know how you would write ads or successful content or even know who to target through your ad platforms if you haven't been involved in those processes.
And you know what? That book that we talked about before we started recording, Rise of the Revenue Marketer.
Yes.
She talked about how one company has gotten around that. It's a much bigger company. I can't remember which company it was, but they bring in new marketing people, and they first spend 3 or 4 months in sales. They don't even report to marketing. They have to be in sales before they can work in marketing.
I think that's genius. I mean, really, that's such great insight for getting started. Like, if I'm sitting there in front of an email platform, like, I don't know what to write, go sit with a sales team, and then you're going to immediately know what to write.
Yeah, and there's marketers have a big image problem. I don't know if your viewers are going to.
They will.
Leader, and he talked about how I don't know if this was in the book, but there was a study by the Fournier's group that talked about how 80% of CEOs don't trust marketers, meaning in that they don't think that marketers understand where revenue comes from, how it happens. They're more focused on activities and all those kinds of things, and they whether they are or not, they seem to be disconnected from sales pipeline and how the money gets made. And so that's why I was in a meeting recently with a bunch of marketers, and they were talking quite a bit about that. And I said, guys, you're here in this room complaining about how your CEOs don't understand the marketing function and what you all are doing and why you need more budget. And it's because you're talking about marketing activity. You need to speak his or her language, which is what I just mentioned.
Oh, Chip's going to really like that point.
We have totally found that to be true. That is exactly right. I always tell my team around here that sales leads, marketing validates. We get the opportunity to look through what's going on in the data and all those things, help them figure out the best way to approach what they're trying to do and the outcome that they're trying to achieve. I know, Ashley, you kind of had asked that question early on, like how do you pick and how do you do it? And the way I think about it is from two different tracks, if you will. The first track is it's kind of like what Douglas was talking about for his podcast. Has something not been done on his podcast before? Is there something that he needs information on? I like to find innovation in areas that seem completely contrary to whatever it is we're doing. So here at Rogue, we do a lot in the technology space. We do a lot in the finance and the healthcare space. So what's going on in the manufacturing space? Manufacturing marketing. And it's amazing what they're doing over there and how you can innovate and take that and bring that over into another industry, and how that innovation, if you will, is something that sparks something new in the spaces that we're working in. So I know that's one area that I would look for and something that I'm working towards always. But then the second is always more self-serving, and it's about trying to figure out what are we struggling with. To Douglas's point earlier about this idea of how come we think we've always got the right idea, and we want to get a client to understand that. We're having a conversation with them and we're telling them exactly, in our minds, it's exactly like this. This is how it needs to happen. Why is the chasm really still so big? And, now we've got a problem. We're going to try to figure out what that problem is, and what, this is a real thing for us here at Rogue. And what we've decided to do is say, you know what, I bet we're not bringing them in on the process. They're not seeing enough. We're not asking enough of the right questions. We're not pausing to hear what they have to say. We're not listening correctly. Some of those kinds of things. And again, some of the books that I've heard on Douglas's podcast, but, other areas as well. When we're looking for a specific answer, it's amazing the wealth of knowledge that's out there. And then the real clue into it is how to apply it and trying.
Exactly. Applying and trying can be a little bit of a scary thing for a lot of people. But I also think that by diving into some of these topics, like you said, Chip, that you're a little less familiar in, it'll give you a little bit more confidence to really take that plunge and give you some inspiration to try some of those things. And, maybe you're not in the manufacturing space, but you're maybe in the CPG space and you want to try some of the same tactics, and you never know, it might be a new little growth hack that you never knew thought possible. So I kind of want to talk a little bit more about where our industry is headed. And that seems to be along the same lines of this article that I think, Chip, you maybe shared with me recently. And it was talking about we're entering the age where it's less about the information and it's actually about reputation. I'm kind of interested to hear Douglas's thoughts on this, as I know he's into obviously the information stage of things, but how does that play into, just kind of the marketing and sales industry in general? Oh, we lost you. We lost your volume again.
That's crazy.
Dang volume. I don't know what keeps happening. Chip, what are your thoughts on what kind of happens with this shift from the information age to the reputation era?
Well, my thoughts are, I really want to hear Douglas's thoughts.
I know.
But I think it is one thing to have knowledge. I think it's something entirely different to be able to apply what you're grasping and what you're learning, and to give yourself enough grace and a break to go off and try these things. It really matters what you're doing with it.
Hey, he's back.
All that happens when you have that.
I'm used to getting kicked out of places, so this really isn't a problem.
No, this is crazy.
You haven't even had any scotch today, and you're getting kicked out of here multiple times.
Maybe I should start.
It might go better. I don't know.
Yeah. Hey, Chip, let me mention something. You mentioned earlier, and I'm sorry I keep getting kicked off. Clearly, Edward Snowden doesn't want me on your show. But you mentioned about, why are they still thinking that way? why is this still this legacy thinking? And, why did they not understand? Why don't they understand what we're talking about? And I think one of the things it's helpful is that you have to let them, and again, this is hard for me to do too, you have to let them discover on their own these things. And so
volume went off.
We lost you again.
Goodness. Well, that is disappointing because I feel like he was on a good track with what he was saying there. Chip, can you carry on that point? Because I know that we've recently talked a little bit about,
probably some of the things that we've heard in some of the stories, but I think he's exactly right. We have to lead them on their own self-discovery, and we have to ask questions that help them think about what the process looks like and what would they do instead of. And in doing that, they come to a realization that, that they came to their own conclusion.
Exactly. It's like the Columbus style, let them discover on their own what you already know, but you can really only do that by sort of the Socratic method of leading them through. Also, I think that people want to feel like they have more control. So you probably have clients or of companies where they feel safer by writing a check to run a big ad instead of doing something that actually costs less but requires a little more time and work. There's just a certain security there, but also a lot of the people that are leaders in businesses, they came up at a time when they had more of a megaphone that they could use to shout at their prospective customers, and they had a more captive audience. Mm-hmm. That doesn't exist anymore. And
it does not.
One of my interviews was with a guy named Tom Fishburne, who's called the Marketunist. You guys may know of him. Mm-hmm. And I asked him, it was the celebration of his book that came out about his first 15 years of being the cartoonist. And he's a graduate of Harvard Business School, and he's a marketer at a lot of blue chip companies before he became a full-time cartoonist. And I asked him what his inspiration was for such great material over the years. And he said the number one source of ideas for making fun of marketers and businesses is making fun of people who think they still have a captive audience. He said that's the number one place he gets his ideas from, because everyone thinks that every marketer in business, many of them, think that other people are interested in their product. They're not. Yeah. And even their moms aren't that interested. I mean, their moms are proud of the marketers, but
that's hilarious.
If you think about it.
I think once upon a time we were told, I'm 41, so I mean I've 10 years ago, even maybe 15 years ago, the way that it worked in marketing was don't let anybody see how the sausage is made. Just go off and do the stuff and have these great results and show them all the great results, and that will be great. And I think that as people are progressing, we've all been practitioners. We've all been under the hoods. We've experienced what these things are like, and they do want to be a part of the process. And I think one of the things we're discovering as well is that it's not enough to just tell them this is the answer. They want to be a part of the sausage making, if you will. So that's a paradigm shift. That's different, or at least it's something we're seeing that's different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. I wonder if this has to do with how brands are shifting, even how they communicate to their customer base too. A lot of that is experience based, marketing and technology and multi-level experiences. Like the Domino one is what we talk about a lot here, where they're no longer really just a pizza company. They're actually a technology company. So having those touch points and having that experience across the board for them has really, drawn in the consumer, and it's made them an industry leader. So I guess the same can be said for marketing practitioners. Okay, well, I would like to wrap up this episode with talking to each of you and getting a few book recommendations for our viewers. I know that most people who are watching this right now are well within the realms of being in the sales or marketing fields. So I'd love to know what a tried and true book recommendation would be, and what's a new one that you are looking forward to reading. Douglas, we'll start with you.
So the book that I recommend to a lot of people, although, your results may vary, but people say, what's one book I could read to understand this new world and understand kind of the new balance of power? And that's The New Rules of Marketing and PR by David Meerman Scott. And that's one of 2 books that has had the biggest impact on my career. And if you read it, you need to make sure you read the 6th edition. This book is in 29 languages, and it's a bestseller. It's used in a lot of universities. It's really, he just updated it last summer. So that's a great one. As for a new one, oh gosh, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a big table over there full. Maybe you can see some of them.
Let me see if I can bring you up solo. Oh, then now we can. Now we can see all your books.
Yeah, but anyway, there's books that show up here every day now. So I can't tell you, I can't think what I'm looking forward to. Actually, you know what? There's one book. Let me mention one. Talk Triggers. I haven't read it, but it's by Jay Baer. And Jay Baer is one of those guys that when he writes a book, just go ahead and buy it because you'll be glad you read it. It's sort of like Daniel Pink or Ryan Holiday, people like that. That'll be coming out in October. That's one, and I'm hoping to get him on the podcast. He's been on twice before, and he's the only guest on the Marketing Book podcast who has actually ridden in my car.
Wow.
And we always bring that up because one day I'm going to sell that car on eBay, and I'm going to say Jay Baer rode in his car. And Jay said, great, I'll give you a bunch of books to put in the trunk.
Hey, you know what? I'd pay extra for a car with all that in it.
Yeah.
You can't you can't get this anywhere. Chip, what about you?
Well, Douglas was talking early on about how marketers kind of we've given ourselves a bad reputation. There's we get known as being the brand police. We're focused exclusively on a logo or the colors or packaging something up.
I like to call them the arts and crafts party planners.
Yes, the party planner.
Who work in the Make It Pretty department.
Yes, the Make It Pretty department.
Yes. And I think that maybe from the book recommendations or the things that are interesting about that is that if we can kind of go back up to the top of the show, when we're talking about empathy and emotion and humanity and all that kind of stuff, I think there are a couple authors, kind of like you said, Jay Baer, just buy his book. But, a Seth Godin, a Malcolm Gladwell, an Adam Grant, these are some other people who are thinking about things in completely different ways, and the humanity and just the emotion and the relationships that go on behind all that. It's another one of the reasons I really like Douglas's podcast. There is so much sales on it, and that is the missing component, is that relationship, the humanity. I think it's interesting. I think branding is actually on its way back. It's not branding what we were just talking about, pretty pictures and the arts and crafts and the logos and the colors. But when you're thinking about it from the reason and the logic behind what you're doing and what's your reason for being and the true meaning of branding, I think we've got the ability to really start doing some things from an empathy and humanity perspective. And I think those guys that we were just talking about are doing a lot to help us start thinking about things differently.
I agree. No, you're lost again. Man, tech is not on our side today. Perhaps that should be the next book that we read, is how to get better at audiovisual with Facebook Live, because
it's why I don't do lives. I will only do podcasts that I can edit, and they can be amazing every time they come out.
Yeah.
Right. It's real, people. Welcome to the real.
I know. You're back. Please get ready.
Actually, Chip, I couldn't agree more. I gave a talk in Chicago just a couple of weeks ago to a bunch of manufacturers, as a matter of fact. And it was the talk was called "Stop Talking About Your Products First." And I thought I was going to be pulled off the stage for making a talk like that. But at the very end, I reminded them of the most important word in marketing, which is empathy. And, empathy is not sympathy. Sympathy is sorrow or compassion or pity for someone. Empathy is just putting yourself in the other person's shoes. And the companies that are able to do that are really doing very well. And the marketers that have just a little bit more empathy for their customers are the ones that are succeeding wildly. Just do it a little bit, and you'll have better results. There's a guy named Brian Carroll who wrote 10, 15 years ago. He wrote a book called Lead Generation for the Complex Sale, I believe it is. And I've met him, and I know he's working on a book about empathy and marketing. And so if he's watching, I hope he'll hurry up, because I really want to interview him.
This idea of just do a little bit, though, it's the same thing with lifelong learning. Just doing a little bit can take you so far. And just the ability, you're on episode 175 this week, I think, Douglas, on your podcast. This is episode 25 for us of While You Were Working Live, and we're taking this new format. But part of it is just the consistency. I mean, what 25 looks like, actually, this one's had a lot of technical hiccups. But what it looked like on episode 1, I mean, just the growth.
Drastically different.
It's just amazing. It's incredibly different.
Well, I've clearly broken something.
I know, what happened?
You're our Kim Kardashian of the Facebook Live episodes. You're breaking the platform. You're breaking the internet. So
I'll take
congratulations.
That as a compliment. Yes, thank you.
It is meant to be a compliment.
It goes a long way. That's probably a good way maybe to end the show.
Yes, it is. Well,
but I'm not married to Kanye West, so
you're level up. You're winning there. Well, thank you both for coming on the show today. I have learned a lot. I have a laundry list of books that I need to listen or actually read, and then also now listen to on your show, Douglas. So I'm excited to do that.
And I'm going to send a stack of these marketing book podcast bookmarks to Chip for everyone at the office.
We need those. We're going to pass them out. And only if people are good and they promise that they're going to actually read some books. So that's the deal. Well, as usual, everybody that has been watching, you can get the links and all the extra resources that we've mentioned in this episode. I will link all the books and all the podcasts that Douglas has discussed today, as well as Chip. And we will direct you to all the books that we've also mentioned. And as usual, if you can give us a like, give us a comment, and let us know what you think about the episode, minus the technical difficulty.
My fault.
And we hope to have Douglas back someday on the show. We will fix the audio technical issues, and we will see you guys episode.
Thank you.